I've also learned a lot from Balazs along the way, and I'm thrilled that he's spending a few months with us here at Northwestern. And take it away.
Thank you, Nash. Thanks a lot, and thanks for inviting me. It's a great crowd, and I met Nash's lab back when it was at the Urban and Champaign. And
Yes.
It's always a very vibrant and very interesting group of graduate students and postdocs. Let me start by saying that this talk will not be a traditional paper talk, so this is not one article or manuscript that I'll be presenting here, but more of an emerging book project. And I try to give you the sometimes tentative but more general insights that I'm trying to gather together for a book project from various paper projects. So some of the work with data will be preliminary, some of the data and analyses already published. But what I'm trying to do here now is to gather it to some kind of point of convergence conceptually. So that's why I would really like your input and insight and contributions, which you already started in the discussions in the morning. Escaping Network Gravity, this is a project about innovation in networks. That's not a new idea. I think we can say we know how innovation spreads. That's something that started in the 60s, 1966, medical innovation. The S-curves, the contagions, the takeoff, early adopters, late adopters, saturation. So this process is very well studied, shows up everywhere, almost everywhere. Any kind of contagion, you can think of viral marketing and epidemics, really useful for predicting as well. But what we know less about is where new ideas come from. We know how new ideas spread, but where do they come from? And is there anything we can do there with networks? The traditional take on this, traditional ideas, that new ideas come from great minds, from inventors, from somebody who had a great insight. But if you look at the story of inventions and the history of technology, there's always a network behind that. There's always a team. There's always some kind of a combined effort that's behind every innovation. You need challengers. You need people who challenge the way things have been going so far. You need people who open doors, tweak prior solutions, consolidate those solutions, and then evangelize the crowd around that, and maybe recombine earlier innovations. So all these are roles that need to be connected up somehow, and they are connected up. If you remember the story of the steam engine, this is what's invention as we think about it, occupying 2 floors in a museum. It's not a handy miniaturized beast, but what was not inventing it really, he just doubled the efficiency of previous designs, which you can imagine how huge those were. So he doubled the efficiency of previous designs, and we think of him as the inventor because he had good PR, but what really took this to a new level was Stephenson, who was a tweaker, who quadrupled the efficiency of Watt's design. And now you can put it on a locomotive and it can go away. It's not occupying 2 floors in a building anymore. So this is not an individual story. It's a story of connected minds and combined effort. And the question is, okay, we're getting more and more connected. Information technology connects us better and better. So are we getting more innovative with that? And it's not sure. There are insights that maybe more networking is not more innovation and better ideas. So why is that? Let me start with a little case study. A company was calling us because we have a consulting side to our research center as well, where we gather very interesting data and insights and get field experience. So a telecom company calls us and says, we want to be more innovative. We are somehow not breaking through. We have these projects that keep failing, and somehow we are not generating novelty. We're not there. So we go in and have a survey project and ask people, name somebody who has any ideas. So we want to find these idea people. Where are they in the company? And so they do that, and we identify these people, and we say, well, we accept someone to be an idea person if at least two others say, two independent opinions come, that this is a person with many ideas. So what predicts having many ideas? The most positive one, I colored these bars, these are regression coefficients, so the red ones are network related, the blue ones are not, those are attributes. The most positive one is that many people choose me to help in decisions, which you cannot really consider it as a cause, maybe it's a co-evolving something, so if I ask Nosh to help me in a decision, I have a chance to encounter that he really does have ideas, so that's more an exposure. But as we go down the list from the most positive to the most negative coefficients, the bottom of the list of the most negative ones is that my information comes from a dense group. So if someone says that, that person will not be nominated as idea person. And also just one above it, I'm in the middle of information flows. And the few above it, I tend to choose the same people in many contexts. So there's something about more networking, more information, I want to be in the middle of it, and I want to kind of strongly attach to people, that it makes you much less likely to become an idea person. So somehow innovation is not related to more networking. This was their information flow network, so no wonder. This is just a shapeless blob. It's a dense, everybody's anxious to be in the middle, and they don't realize, well, you're much better off if you stay somewhere out here in the periphery. These are the guys who have original ideas and useful ideas for the others. But they are just too anxious to be in the middle of the flows. So somehow our instincts of networking go against shaping networks that are innovative. And this is the idea behind the four forces of network gravity. Somehow the fundamental mechanisms in our social networks, the way we build them and operate them, those are at odds with creativity and innovation. So somehow the way our social networking instincts, practices, hunches, mechanisms have evolved is for something else than being creative and come up with novelty. It's probably more about safety, emotional stability, security. You can probably take it back to hunter-gatherers. It's efficiency, it's cohesion, but no, it's not about finding something out of the box. What are those four forces? The first one is hierarchy. When I ask people probably not as versed in network science as you are, which one of these two network pictures, the left and the right, which one is closer to a friendship network structure? They often tend to say the one on the left. It's this very horizontal. It's like Manuel Castells. It's many to many. It's very flat. But actually, our social networks are much more like the picture on the right. We have hubs, people with way more friends than any of us. Very, very, very few people have a huge majority of friends. So what this says to innovation is that if you're not interested in the idea that the hubs have, you are out of luck. You will just have a very long way to travel to most of the other nodes. So if somebody here has an idea, or somebody here has an element that combining with someone else's thought could become an idea, well, it's tough luck. Here, it's much easier, would be much easier, but that's not the topology our social networks are evolving. We have hubs. The second is that our networks are very closed. Social networks are extremely closed. This is just one simulation example that looking at all the triadic patterns. The closed triad is 4,700 times more likely in a social network than in a simulated network without any preference for closing triads. So just randomly, like an Adler-Shreni graph or a uniform random graph. This is, you just don't see closed triangles. So this is something, again, that we very strongly prefer to close our triangles, spending our energy in network groups where we already spend a lot of energy. So we don't spend that time, that effort, that money, whatever it takes to maintain a contact on potentially new cognitive areas of the network. We spend it in the same community. The third one is homophily, very strong again. Again and again comes up. This is Watson Costinet's paper on Columbia University's emailing. I probably should not have said that. So a large email data set. And what they have found is striking is that, I go back a little bit, so on the x-axis is network distance. 1 is your friends, 2 is your friends' friends, you don't know them yet. 3 is your friends' friends' friends, and so on, and 6 would be the whole world, right? 6 degrees of separation is the entire Earth. So that's network distance, and on the y-axis it's similarity in terms of attributes. And what we find is that, of course, our friends are much more similar to us than some baseline. There's a preference for making friends with similar people. What is really sad is that our friends of friends they're already much more similar to us than to some baseline similarity. So in other words, this is the pool where you will meet your future friends. So you're already exposed to quite homogeneous social universe. Even the third step is significantly more similar than the baseline. So we are getting the same ideas or the same kind of perspectives as we explore our social networks, which is blinding us. And speaking of blinding, the fourth mechanism is limited vision. It's some kind of a myopia that we have in navigating our social networks. We don't have a Google search algorithm in our heads for our social networks. We just don't. We are very bad at it. This is a classic study from David Krackhart, the tech company, just 21 or 22 employees, very small. They have been working together for years. This is the social network from locally confirmed ties. So the ties that you see here are those that the two ends of the dyad have said, yes, we collaborate, we work together. But what is interesting that David Krackhart also asked people what they think about the whole network structure, map out the whole thing. How accurate are people seeing that? These are, again, they are together in the same, probably open space company in Silicon Valley for years. This is what the CEO sees. It's pretty far off. He thinks that there are way more ties than there are actually, and it's a much denser structure. He's much more optimistic. Or, I don't know, maybe this would not even be a very efficient company network. But he sees way more ties. Well, if you zoom to another manager, number 18, well, it's a very different world. This person thinks that number 2 is the center of the company, and otherwise it's a group of isolates. So they don't have the vision, and we don't have the vision. We don't really see. If I ask you to draw down the network of your friends, what are the connections 2 steps away? I don't think we would be able to do that. So what is the map then that we can use to map out where should I go with my element for a new idea? Where is that person who can help me with something different and also trusted and also there's a good fit so we could collaborate? So that kind of knowledge is hard to come by. So how can we make networks creative? Because there are cases of innovation and creativity. What's going on there? So what is the way that social networks can escape network gravity? That's the question that we were after in our projects. What are some structures, practices, institutions, elements that can help you get away from this? So you need to do 4 things. You need to go away from hierarchy, so somehow decentralize, leave closure behind, somehow open up closure. Homogeneity, again, inject some diversity or mechanisms that diversify, and the limited vision. Somehow I need a mechanism to find the forums, the meeting places, the kind of marketplaces and mapping facilities to bump into people with the right kind of network ties. The first case study, or first case that I would like to talk about is the history of recorded jazz. We are looking at jazz from the late 19th century, 1896 to 2010, about 200,000 jazz sessions and 400,000 jazz musicians playing in them. And what we would like to understand is the dynamics of exploration and exploitation in networks. jazz is a very innovative field. I would like to ask you, this is an exercise, what do you think? How many instruments, different kinds of instruments, were played in the history of recorded jazz? Like tenor sax is one instrument, a bassoon is another instrument, electric guitar is another instrument. So you can add them up. So how many instruments were played?
I would say at least 15. I've heard all variations of jazz with a lot of different instruments.
Yeah. So how many? 15?
At least.
At least 15?
Yeah.
Okay. Who thinks there were more than 15?
I think a lot more.
A lot more?
Yeah.
Well, how many? 50. 50? Okay.
How many instruments are there in the world? I really don't know.
Okay, I tell you how many instruments there are in the world. The music instrument museums of the world allied together to create an online presentation of all of the things that they've got, and they created a category system. That category system consists of 1,140 instruments. That's the whole world: ethnic, extinct instruments, harpsichords, all kinds of things. 1,140. The history of recorded jazz, there were almost 15,000 instruments, or things used as instruments.
15,000.
15,000. And these things include, we were looking at the list, what the hell? It looked like, the bird sounds, computer noises, things like a kitchen sink was in there as well. We thought it's everything but the kitchen sink, but there was someone playing the kitchen sink. And there was a review, and there was a review of the performance saying that, well, this is really interesting, and what keeps it exciting is this guy's a percussionist take on how he plays the kitchen sink. So this is an extremely creative world. They explore and they go out and they always restlessly try to innovate. That's what we are after. How does that work? What are these guys doing that we don't do regularly when we are kind of trapped in the forces of network gravity? So the case that I'm looking at now is kind of blue, which is, how many of you have heard that album? Okay, it's everybody. It's the top album of jazz in many senses. It's the most re-released album. It was re-released 119 times. 119 different editions were released of this album. Recorded in 1958 in 2 sessions, one in March and one in October. What is interesting, though, is that jazz fans tend to know that, yes, that was a session on 8 March 1958, but what they don't know is that before that session, that little table is a list of sessions, these guys played close to 300 sessions together in the year before that, and not all together. It's not that they kept rehearsing. Miles Davis actually explicitly forbade the musicians to rehearse any of the songs that they played, so that what you hear on Kind of Blue, they play the first time. Or the second, maybe the second take was on the album, but he did not allow people to practice it and kind of learn it. But what they did, they were playing all over the place, different kind of music, Cuban jazz, a little bit of swing, all kinds of music, and not always together. So if you look at their network, these are the people who are on the album. That's the collaboration network by preceding sessions. It's not a fully connected graph, which is astonishing, based on how many times they played before. They are not. Some people have not even played together at all. Wynton Kelly and Bill Evans never played together. Jimmy Cobb and John Coltrane never played together. Wynton Kelly and Miles Davis did not play. So there are lots of missing connections. Miles Davis is not the middle of the network. It's Paul Chambers. Who's Paul Chambers? You know Paul Chambers? Is the bassist. If you remember tunes from Kind of Blue, like So What, the first one, the bass is the backbone. It's what drives the whole thing, and the others are built on that backbone. So that little guy back there, Paul Chambers, is the center of this world, because the bassist is somehow like it's a scale, it's an instrument you can use in many, many very different styles. So he was the one who was picking up lots of different styles and and playing with these guys. So that little network was integrated then in a larger network with lots of overlappings and not a lot of density across them. So somehow these musicians were comfortable with or even enjoying this world where they were playing with very different styles and not always with their bandmates. So this is not like rock music or heavy metal, and it's rare to hear that some bandmates play in a different band at a different time. They were always playing with all kinds of constellations and in clubs and recordings. So this kind of diversity resulted in a network. This is the 1958 jazz universe. The dots are musicians and the lines are collaborations in that year. It's a huge universe, and I color the notes by cohesion. Red is cohesive, so triadic closure, and blue is low triadic closure. It's cut at the median. What is interesting here is that the core, the elite of this network, is not very red. It's not very cohesive. Cohesion is somehow in the peripheries. If you look at some parts of the periphery, you see that, well, yeah, these guys are the cohesive ones. The edges, the fringes, that's where you see bands that stick together and always play together. Mm-hmm. But the core is not. Again, here. Some big red ones there, but mostly blue in the core, and the red one is in the periphery. And what we call these are the fold networks. Networks where it's not a wholly connected cohesive, but there are cohesive little components. You play with bands. I play in the Cuban jazz world a little bit. I play in the swing world a little bit. And you overlap. There are overlapping communities. It's not a whole society of isolates. There are communities, but they overlap and they do not, somehow they resist the forces of closure, that the whole thing should be, let's develop the unified language of jazz and let's play just one kind of music. They don't do that. So this is a scatter plot of the overlap proportion. We'll just make that disappear. So the overlap proportion among preceding sessions, that's closure on the x-axis, going from 0 to 1. 0 meaning that you play with musicians whom you have never played before. It's like isolates and strangers coming together. Probably not much interesting coming out of that. And the other extreme one is that you play with guys whom you have always played together with, and you don't play with anybody else. It's like repeating. It's like the hotel jazz band in a small town. They always just play those guys together night by night. And the y-axis of success is the log number of releases coming out from that session. And you see that the optimum is somewhere between 20%. That's not a lot of closure. So just a 20% overlap and otherwise not overlapping networks are the highest numbers of releases. This is kind of blue right there. Not a lot of closure for that. That's the top. The next most released album is Sketches of Spain from Miles Davis from the same year. That's another amazing album with very, very innovative instrumentation. So I looked at this from one more perspective. This is a heat map, a density heat map, developed by the Media Lab in Paris. It's the same network that you have seen. There's so many dots, so many nodes on that chart, you just don't see the dense part. So I created a density heat map that shows the higher heat indicates more nodes. And what you see here is the entire picture. So there is the elite in the core, very dense, and then there are some little islands and peripheries around it. The jazz world in this time is New York, Los Angeles, and then the rest of the world. That's basically the whole thing. I cut this at 50% clustering. So this is the whole thing, the full network, and I'm now showing you the top 50% in terms of closure. So you see that closure is not in the center, it's more in the peripheries. So the peripheries are where these really cohesive, tight jazz bands are, and the elite is much more exploratory. Okay, so this gave us interesting lessons on how closure and to some extent homogeneity was avoided. There's this mixing, the fold networks that are somehow coming from the instincts of jazz players like Miles Davis do not lock into a cohesive team, even though you might be successful, but don't keep exploring. As a second case study I'd like to show you is it's about video game developers. This is just coming out in the issue 4 of AJS, American Journal of Sociology. Should be out any day now. Collaboration with David Stark and Matthijs de Vaan. We are looking at video game developers, and if you know the world of video games, this is something where a lot of change has happened, a lot of development. This is the early years. How many of you have played this kind of game? Space Invaders? Oh yeah, it's fancy, but the same kind of genre today looks something like this. It's a 3D world. You have your spaceships. You have an economy. You can develop and invest your GDP in new spaceships, and you fight other cultures. You innovate in weapon systems and form alliances and all kinds of things. A little bit more complicated than the Space Invaders from the 70s. So the question is, well, what makes this world successful? How do successful games get assembled? This is the shot of the whole ecosystem of video games from the beginnings to the present being 2010, where the data set stops. And you see all of the video games ever made on this chart as nodes. And these video games are connected by the migration of developers. So what you see here is very, very zoomed out. From the beginnings, how video game developers move from one project to the other in this whole universe. There are these thread-like structures. Those are emerging studios. You maybe recognize down here there's this funny shape. This is Nintendo. Is down there. This is EA Games in the middle. And then there are lots of other studios. They merge. Some of these streams merge and split up, and so it shows how video game developers migrate. And this is what we exploited in our data set, looking at 93 to 2009, more than 8,000 games. And we were recording how a focal game has a collaboration structure based on prior games. So who worked together with whom? It's like the day one of a new project. What is the network structure in that game? This is a picture within one game. So you see that there are tight communities, somewhat separated, and overlapping communities. What we are interested in is what are the optimal combinations. And the interesting aspect of the video games data set is that we don't only have the collaboration networks, but we also have the cognitive elements. Each game is coded by 113 dimensions. The presence of these gives a genetic signature for a game, and it also gives us the experience profile of developers. What kinds of elements do they have experience with? There's a cognitive profile. So each game can be placed in a space of these cultural elements. This is an example for 1 year. So you see that there is a cloud, and there are some outliers. Those are really out of the box. Right? If you look at these ones really far off, that's somewhere at the middle of the road, the typical game for that year. This is what we try to use as a measure for innovation. This is distinctiveness. How far are you from the center of this world? And distinctiveness is about combining features. And this example is from LucasArts, the game Fracture, that combined two features. And I wonder if you recognize what was combined here. So just try to watch and tell me, what do you think is being combined? Any of you know this game?
Shooting and environment manipulation?
That's right, absolutely. The major headache for 3D shooter games was manipulable environment, right? If in the early games you were shooting around and everything just stayed the same. It didn't give you the experience of really shooting around in a room. What game developers are really working hard on is to get an environment that can be changed and then stays that way. It's a challenge because you have to update and change the 3D structure of the space by the actions of the players, and then keep that and work with that from that on. It's a difficult challenge. But what these guys did is that not only met the challenge of allowing the environment to be altered, but they made it a weapon. They made weapons that change the environment, make big humps or depressions or big pits to use as a tactical tool, which made this game extremely successful and very exciting. So this is an example of two features being combined in an interesting way, so that it's successful. This is success. We look at review score as a measure of success from professional game magazines. And what we have found is that, again, team structures where there were separate subgroups just spanned by brokers did not seem to work as well as team structures that overlap. So somehow fold networks are different from brokered networks. And the structure of folds seems to be the key behind generating successful novelty. Well, first generating novelty, and then generating novelty that is successful. And what is exciting here is that combining cognitive and social space, we can reach back to semiotics, which is a striking recognition. It's very simple, but you don't usually think about it. There's a contradictory tension in communication. On the one hand, you struggle to facilitate understanding. Let's let A and B be two people, two developers in a game. You struggle to make that intersection larger. Well, we have to speak the same language. We have to. What do you mean by, I don't know, this physical part of the game engine or that thing? So you have to have an understanding to be able to talk to one another. But on the other hand, we also struggle to increase the value of the communication by maximizing the non-intersecting space. As Yuri Lotman says it, that if you have a perfect understanding, you can talk about anything, but you don't have the motivation to talk about anything. And why would you talk if you just have the exact same understanding about everything? So the more difficult and inadequate the translation from one non-intersecting part of space of language into the other, the more valuable this communication becomes. But it's also more difficult. So that's the kind of balancing. That you want to have cognitive distance. You need to have some kind of overlap so that it's not two completely different languages that you have no idea what the other one is talking about. And that balancing is what we feel is going on in the fold networks. I give you three examples in these cognitive social networks. That was a challenge, by the way, how to draw a picture of a network with the cognitive element also involved. We did these cognitive plots. The way we worked it out, let me just show you, is that we have two more networks with developers and a prior game, and we place the prior games in a multidimensional scaling plot based on the cognitive aspects, so the cognitive profile of the game. What kind of features were there? And they are close together if the features are shared, and they are far apart if the features are not shared. That gives us the anchor points in the space, and we use layout, spring embedder layout for the developers, for the wide nodes, to place them in between. So here you can read it in a way that, well, if two blue dots are close together, that's a low cognitive distance, and it's spanned by the developers right there. And that is a really high cognitive distance there, and it is spanned by a few developers. So if you have these high cognitive distances that are not spanned by developers, this project will probably not work well. It's people speaking Chinese and Swahili coming into the same room. And what is this? What is going on? There's no trust, there's no understanding, it's frustration. But if there are overlapping people in between those, then that they can recognize, we can borrow this idea from that very different project, from a basketball game, and apply it to a shooter game. So this game was actually too diverse, and there were not enough folds between the groups. Riven, the sequel to Myst, that was the title. This was a game that's, I don't know if you have played it.
Yeah.
You played it?
Yeah.
It's pretty far off. You have these still images, and you have to learn a number system. You need a notebook for it, and it's solving puzzles.
It's a point-and-click adventure game. It's pretty much you're just in a open world. You're just solving puzzles.
Yeah.
You're, yeah.
It's a puzzle solving, pretty unique. So people, at least in the reviews, what they were saying is that yeah, it's so hard to get your head around this. You have to learn the new number system. Imagine that for a video game. This is another example of a flop. This was a real flop. These are Shoot Larry, box office bust. It was a game with just too much of the same. So people who developed it had too close kind of. They were doing the same things over and over. It was supposed to be funny, but anybody played this game?
Yeah. I've played pretty much everything.
Oh, great, great. So you with
this is more like an adult focused.
yeah, it's a porn movie industry, some kind of adventure and investigation, and just as it says, it was a bust. This one is Fallout, the original Fallout from 1997. The most successful video game by the Guinness Book of World Records, right? Have you played Fallout?
Yeah. If you include more recent games, though, it's
Yeah.
a sequel had a huge success.
Yeah, the third sequel was a few years ago, which was also a huge success. But the Fallout, this one from 1997, was the game that created a genre, a new genre. It created the open environment adventure game. You could play the game a million times and you never play it the same way. Did you have that experience with it?
Yeah, I've played 10 times, I think, and it's really open-ended as to who you're able to talk to and kill off accidentally, which will change
Yep.
all the outcomes in the end.
Yeah, it's very flexible. It's very addictive. And what you can see here in the team, that they composed this game. People who made this game had experiences in very diverse games, shooter games, sports games, puzzle games, adventure games, but there were lots of overlaps. So somehow this structure, they were able to bridge the cognitive diversity, and they did generate the most successful, probably the most innovative game in the history of video games. So now to the modeling, what we do is we have a selection model and then a full model. It's a Heckman model, but you have a first stage, a selection stage, and then a modeling stage. What we do here is that we first model whether you make a distinctive game. The team comes together, they make something new. Is it distinctive? Is it different from the mainstream or not? Then the second step is the selection step, is whether this is getting reviewed at all or not. And then the third step is, well, what's the review score you get? What is interesting here is that the more innovative the game, the better it fares with the review scores. But really innovative ones, they get thrown into the waste bin in the review process. So there is a truncation at the end of extreme innovation. You don't even get reviewed because the reviewers just look at it and say, what is this? I don't recognize it as a game. You just throw it away. So you have to have some conventionality to get reviewed at all by the game magazines. But once you're getting reviewed, the more innovative you are, the better scores you get. And what we have found, without going into all the details of the modeling, is that this cognitive folding is something that really matters for distinctiveness, innovation, And it also matters for innovative success. And this is just a schematic diagram, not really a real plot. It's just an idea plot to show you how distinctiveness is related to success. You can be routine and successful. That happens. You can be innovative and successful. That's in the video game industry. It's very important. But you can be too innovative and it becomes weird and there's no success. You're just getting thrown into the wastebasket. What is interesting is the structure of predictors for routine and innovative success are different. For routine, there are shared elements, of course. You need new talent and past success. But you need an experience, a high level of experience of the ways you have been doing things in the past. That's what I would call related to limited vision. You need larger groups within the team, larger subgroups. Possibly the whole team is one subgroup. That's closure. And you need clear high performers, people who stand out. That's hierarchy. So you need these clear leaders leading a very well lubricated, cohesive community with lots of experience. That gets you routine success. Now it's different from what you need for innovative success. You need the new talent and the past success, but with smaller overall team and overlapping groups with cognitive distance. So smaller subgroups that overlap, and they overlap across cognitive distance. So you have these different experiences in these subgroups and there's overlapping. This is what gets you innovative success. So make an innovation and make it successful in the review scores. That is, I think, where I would stop. I have more case studies, more cases if you are interested, but maybe we should go into questions and more of an open discussion. Okay?
Could you tell us a little bit more about your data set and how it was collected?
The video games data set?
Sure.
The video games data set was collected from the Moby Games data set and the German Game Datenbank data set, so industry data that you have to purchase. That the video game industry keeps account of all of the games, collects all of the reviews, converts the review scores to a standardized score between 0 and 100, and collects all the data about from the credits about the developer team, and they also maintain a somewhat cleaned up data set of all the developers, 130,000 developers in this entire data set. Together with their roles, which we haven't yet really analyzed the evolution of roles in video games. Usually you have physics engine programmers, texture designers, people who design the game narrative and the overall flow, the overall graphical world, people who design audio and then audio talent, people who give their voices to the game. Music designers, composers, musicians, and you have the logistics people, accountants, legal people, project managers. And the developer company is different from, often different from the publisher company. The publisher company is putting in the marketing effort and the sales effort. So in our models, we put in fixed effects for the publisher company because the success of the game largely depends on how much cash the publisher has to put the game on the tables of game magazines and game websites. So that's the data that we have for the video games. And we have the features of the games coded as well in a coherent way. It's 103 dimensions of, is it top-down view, is it side-scrolling, is it adventure, is it sports, it's all kinds of features are in there. Yeah, go ahead.
Did you notice anything related to kind of the periods, right? Because there was
Oh,
the
yeah.
start and everyone was very innovative, and then it kind of went together, except for some very odd efforts at like Japan during the early 90s, and then 3D happened and the world opened up again.
Yeah. Absolutely, there are very, very strong transitions in this. Related to platforms, there are, I think, 7 platform eras or periods in this time. And the number of games, and the kinds of games, and the overall creativity changes a lot. The most creative period, most creative year was 1997. Somehow that, when 3D came up, hardware acceleration for 3D graphics, there were quite a number of platforms. Somehow that was the golden year. We stopped in 2010 but there's a whole watershed, there's a whole transition happened after that. So if we did this now, going to 2016, there's the iPad and phone, tablet and phone games as now the major part of it, and it's also a change in how we think about games and how developers think about games.
Do you see anything specifically about new members, like post-transition with members pre-transition? Is that specifically better than mixing between people that haven't worked together but both pre-transition time?
Well, we haven't analyzed this transition yet. Our data ends in 2010. I would love to do that. We have time as a fixed effect. Again, the years as fixed effects in the modeling. So we look at basically within year and within publisher variation. But this is something that we plan to study. It's probably a little different project to look at the technological transitions and how a team or individual developers can fare across these transitions. Maybe you specialize too much and you flop, or maybe you are able to keep diverse connections and exploit a transition across technology.
Do you have any sense of the cost to produce the games
Yeah.
or revenue from the games, and does that correlate with the reviews and the popularity of the games?
Yeah, well, we don't have the budget. The overall revenues of the video game industry now surpassed movies and music combined. So this is the largest creative industry.
So I meant
Yeah, for the given
For- yeah.
project. Yeah, what we don't have the money amount. We use a proxy. The number of developers is a proxy for budget because that's the largest expenditure as personnel cost, and material costs are probably constant. It's the same for all projects, and that is positively correlated with the ability to put the game on the table to get it reviewed. So we control for that. That's our best proxy for budget. These projects became huge, so it's probably multi-million-dollar.
Yeah, there was a recent one which, with all the marketing, was 500 million,
Yeah.
and that was Destiny. Hit a $500 million budget, and it sold really well, but it reviewed mediocre. Which is one thing I wanted to ask is, have you thought about looking at sales numbers as a success? Because there have been more than enough cases where, say, like a 90 out of 100 game has sold a small amount, but a 60% has pushed millions of units, and so
Yeah.
it's
We tried. It's hard to get that data, and it's hard to get it how much units
Yeah.
weigh. So far we haven't gotten any sales numbers. Or we also tried for the jazz, which we haven't succeeded.
I know
yet. It's very dispersed.
review scores nowadays aren't as heavily aren't necessarily used to show success of the game.
Yeah.
An example is Tomb Raider, the reboot had a good review score,
Yeah.
but it sold much lower
Yeah.
than it was anticipated, and it actually cost Square Enix money up front, and I think they just broke even
Yep.
on their profit and losses. Right?
Yeah. So that happens, and it would be great to have the revenue data. But we don't have it yet. And that's other reason why we stopped at 2010. And I think the transition is even deeper than technological.
Yeah.
It's a whole new ecosystem where reviews are When you read reviews now, it's much more user reviews than professional reviews.
And
probably.
then there's a bonus, usually for a studio to get a certain Metacritic score, which is the combined
Yeah,
reviews of all the outlets. So
yeah,
it's extremely competitive, and I know many of the mid to low level employees and developers are constantly transitioning studios within the past
yeah.
3 to 4 years. It's a lot more chaotic
Yeah,
if you're not one of the top studios.
yeah. It's a changing world, and it's. I would love to analyze that. Maybe in a few years, get back to it when we see more of this transition. Supercell is a very interesting company, a very new structure. They have these. They don't gather developers for large projects. They have these little small cells, and they tell each cell of maybe a dozen or less developers to come up with something, and they have these projects parallel. Release it on the iPad or Apple Store, and if it doesn't show a steep enough takeoff, they just cut the whole thing, that little project. And they have these multiple things evolve, and they focus on the one, and the Clash of Clans was one of their projects. They focus on the one that seems to be taking off really steep. So new technology, new world, and it's going down into new organizational forms.
That's not uncommon in terms of even in movies now. A lot of the studios, instead of trying to plan on a marketing and advertising campaign well in advance, they actually wait till the movie's out a few days to see which ones are getting momentum on social media, and then they push
And then
in
they
terms of doing that.
Yeah, that's happening in the games as well.
Yeah.
I don't know, not my usual group. But I notice in many of these presentations, people sort of fall back on talking about what bridges these nodes and things like that as a system or a platform.
Uh-huh.
What are the terms for the connectors that people make the connections with?
Yeah, you mean brokers or people who connect others?
Either way, brokers or
Yeah, what we
creative
try to say here is that we distinguish brokers from folds. So it seems to make a difference whether you are an outsider having connections into two communities. That's brokerage,
Okay.
classic brokerage. It's different from being in both communities at the same time. And this is a debate that we have with Ronald Bird, that he suggests, or he thinks, there's a publication that's coming out soon from Ronald Bird on reinforced holds. He says that, well, structural folds is just one other mechanism for brokerage. It's a reinforcement of the holes, which makes it more valuable to broker across them. But what we did in our modeling here is that we included individual brokers and more than one person in the overlap. And what we see is that if you have more than one person connecting to communities as overlapping, it's much more beneficial. So what is happening is not that individuals are kind of taxing and profiting from flows and recognizing the combinations that can happen, because an individual as an outsider to both communities cannot really do much to realize that new idea. But it's the overlap, and especially the overlap with two or more persons, that really helps. Because once you have two people overlapping two very different, cognitively different communities, they have the motivation to come up with a Creole, come up with a new language, hybridize the cognitive elements. Because if you're just alone, you can switch. We are very good at tolerating ambiguity and multiple identities, and we can just keep switching between two contexts, and we all do that every day. You have your sports club, you have your work colleagues, you have your friends, you have your family, and just switch all the time. But if you have two or more people, then you start developing some common language, some common understanding, and that can be the seed of innovation. That is one important difference.
Thank you.
I guess what this really makes me think of, especially since you're the two fields you're taking are jazz and games,
Yeah.
is the practice of the game jam. where a bunch of people who are usually professional and
Uh-huh.
commercial developers get together and form small subgroups and usually create small projects that are like incredibly innovative.
Uh-huh.
And I was just wondering if you had taken a look at that, or
Wow, I didn't know about that phenomenon. So it's Game Jam is about developing games
Yeah.
or playing games?
it's about developing games. So there's the university I was at, IT University of Copenhagen, has the largest game jam program in the world with about 500 participants
Oh.
once a year. And then there's now a global game jam program that happens in January that takes place in like 45 countries around the world.
Wow.
But
So how does that work? So that these
It
people
work-
come together in
Yeah,
little groups?
it's, I mean, there's different types. You can have a preset, all groups all come in and they spend all the 3 days or whatever
Mm-hmm.
trying to make a game, or there are game jams where all groups are randomly assigned, and then you have a few days to make something.
What is the motivation? Is that for game developers to encounter new ideas?
I mean, a lot of it is like innovation based.
Uh-huh.
It's also a practice that's been taken up by established game companies that are in the independent gaming scene to develop new prototypes for games, and they'll often like split their team up into game jam groups that are small subsets of their overall projects. And one of the goals, like I'm thinking especially of this company called Double Fine, they'll take their overall teams that are separated into different game projects and essentially randomize the composition so that there's a lot of overlap between their individual game groups.
Great.
And then develop innovative systems over that. The International Game Developers Association has already done some like survey data, but as far as I know, they're not collecting any network data. But the Global Game Jam people are pretty approachable about research stuff, I think.
Great. I'll contact them. It's a great idea.
Tommy has a master's degree in.
Games now.
Fantastic. Yeah, I should talk to you more.
Absolutely.
You will be on this.
Unfortunately, I can't make it today, but we
Oh,
He
should.
brings it around. Yeah, he was supposed to, but
Yep,
he's in
we'll-
class, so yeah.
We'll talk.
I kind of have a question for you and you at the same time.
Yep.
This notion of double find, or this sort of, it's not a developer, but it's a mechanism for reassorting.
Mhm.
I was wondering, like, as far as non-technical contributions to the game, so does the project manager appear in the data set, even in the jazz?
Yeah.
You know, it would be kind of akin to like having a movie with just actors, but then not saying who director or producers are.
Yeah.
So do you have a sense of are there coordinators? Are there people that are sort of stroking the collaboration in different ways? Do you have a sense of that?
With the data, we have those people in the video games. We have those people in the data
Oh,
set.
okay.
We just
Great.
excluded the purely logistical, like accountant, lawyer, like the support, logistic support. But we have the project lead, manager, those people in there. What is I have qualitative evidence. We did not look at these people specifically up close in the data set, but interviews and interviews with game developer companies say that these people are consciously mixing up the teams. So after maybe the second or the third game, they don't let people be in the same combination. They want to shake it up, turn it low, rotate people around projects, because they're very conscious about this kind of settling in and getting into a groove and just crunching out the same.
Do you get a sense that that's intuition, or do you feel like that they do have some sort of decision support or intelligence to sort of pop?
I haven't encountered any tools that they might use. Probably it's intuition and it's just being there in the room. They
I
use
can tell you, it's a lot of all the publishers have a say in like what they're making. As in, if you look at Call of Duty, it's pretty much the same sort of game every time, but because of the sales numbers, they let them keep at it. But with, like, say, God of War, once they hit the third game and they tried a fourth game, it wasn't as good, and so they just shook up the team and all the projects. And so the person who has, or who's in charge of all the budget usually has a voice in all that. Because I've done QA work with Bungie when I was in high school and college, and so I've noticed a lot of that team structure shake up a bit, depending on the upper level employees looking at the trends.
So I'll switch gears a lot from the last couple questions because this isn't going to have to do with video games.
Sure.
So I noticed in a lot of the analysis, I feel like it was a very macro level or network level view. And, you know, you talk about the role of, you know, brokers helping kind of being in a good network position, whereas the network structure of successful versus unsuccessful games. And I was wondering if there was some individual level relationship between the type of roles they had played in past projects and in the future. For example, somebody who had served as a broker between several diverse groups, if in a future project they then were the leader of that project, were they more effective at leading their team since they had experience being a broker? Or people who were used to being leaders, do they make more effective brokers in the future? That sort of relationship.
That's an interesting question. We haven't gotten to that yet, the individual career level analysis. That would be an interesting next step. I would expect to see some effects there for sure.
Great. Well, I think we've gone a little past our scheduled time, but this was such a great conversation, and I'm glad that we had so many experts on gaming around here. This was a very pleasant surprise. It was great. Well, thank you again all very much. You know that our next speaker coming up, I think, is it Prasad Balkundi from SUNY Buffalo, who does network stuff, and he's going to be here shortly, so look out for that call next. Okay. Well,
Thanks a lot. Thank you.